To bring to you. We have regular season football. So football is back. Very exciting. We had a bunch of great games over the weekend. I'm going to jump into it. Sort of lay out what I'm going to do for you this week. I'm going to do my Do Not Tilt After 1 Week article. So I did that kind of last year, right at the beginning of the year. Tilting is just another way of saying don't overreact. So whether that's positive overreaction, negative overreaction, we don't want to overreact, especially in 1 week. And then it's also going to lead into next week. I'm going to do my Don't Tilt After 2 Weeks article. So I'm going to talk about the other 16 teams that I don't get to today that at least got you my article. I wrote about 16 teams in this article. I'm probably not going to talk about all of them in this video just for time's sake, but I'm going to hit on the big ones that I want to talk about. So without further ado, let's jump into it. We're going to not tilt after 1 week. So first up, let's go ahead and talk about the Cardinals. So all-around productive game for the Cardinals. They actually had 3 players with 2 or more touchdowns, so very impressive. Those players were Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins, and Christian Kirk. We're not really much to worry about them. However, you might be tending to worry about the running backs. So we know that Chase Edmonds and James Conner, they both had, I would call it, below-average games. So Edmonds had 12 carries. Conner had 16, and really not much production between those carries. I wouldn't read too much into it. The Titans have a pretty stout rush defense, so it limited them to only 116 rushing yards. There's going to be better days ahead, no doubt about it, especially as the Cardinals continue to do what they did to the Titans on Sunday. So it does, however, look like this split is going to be more like a 50-50 split, though. Than some might have thought, maybe a 70-30 in favor of Edmonds, but it looks like it's going to be pretty close to a 50-50, at least after week 1. So talking about great games, we had the Ravens on Monday night. So Lamar, he actually had an uncharacteristically bad game, and it was against an average defense. It's a little bit more disappointing in that fact. So he had 235 passing yards, 12 rushes, 86 rushing yards, 1 touchdown, and 3 fumbles, and 2 of those were actually lost. So the fumbles are by far the most disappointing part of his day. That really kills us here in Dynasty Owner. We have -1 point for a fumble and -2 points if the fumble is lost. So that really hurts you when you fumble like that. So Lamar finished with 19.3 fantasy points. I'm not too worried. He's going to recover the way he usually does. He'll end up finishing as a top 10 quarterback at the end of the season. Moving down, let's talk about the Bears. So the Bears, kind of a strange game script for it to go wrong for Allen Robinson. So you would think, the Bears down big. It was against a good team, no doubt. Rams are top 3 defense, but you would think with the way the game went, Robinson would have more receptions. And the truth is he really had a lot of targets. He saw a lot of work. So he had 11 targets, 6 receptions, only 35 yards, so very disappointing. Andy Dalton was finding him pretty close to the line of scrimmage for most of the game. And that ended him with 9.5 fantasy points. So nowhere near what you would want out of your wide receiver one, especially one that costs you almost $18 million a year. Don't worry, there's hope. So 2 things that I have on my radar. First, hopefully we have Justin Fields starting in the upcoming future, and hopefully that's sooner than later. So I project that's going to be at least before the second half of the season starts. We saw that Dalton really had no willingness to move around at all, out of the pocket, tuck the ball and run, and that's exactly what was needed on Sunday night against the Rams, a quarterback that's able to move and get out of the pressure. So it's also chalk it up to the fact that not one player tallied more than 45 receiving yards. Very strange for that to happen really on any team, and it really just comes down to the Rams defense. So I look for a better matchup against the Bengals next week. I wouldn't be tilting, wouldn't be overreacting to Allen Robinson's poor start. Talk about the Browns. So what a great game that was, but it was, after all, a rough ending for the Browns, and that's kind of how it usually ends when you're playing the Chiefs, unfortunately for their opponents. Most disappointing part of that game, I think, would have been Baker's performance. So just not a good performance at all. He totaled 321 passing yards, 1 interception. That's fine. I mean, the yardage is great, but he just didn't have any scores, and that's going to kill you. 15.8 fantasy points. So coming into the 2021 season, I labeled Baker as a perfect bench quarterback, and I still stand by that. He's the typical bench quarterback, perfect bench quarterback that you would want in Dynasty Owner. He has a low salary, so right at $8.1 million. That's low for a quarterback. And he has middle-of-the-road production. He is not going to have, upside production, or else he'd be a typical starter for Dynasty Owner. But middle-of-the-road production with a low salary, that's perfect, right in the sweet spot for a bench quarterback. And the performance really fit the description. I mean, you didn't get, great game. You didn't get plus 20 points. It's probably what you wanted. But you got enough to not, at least destroy that bench position for you for the week. I anticipate a lot more upside out of Baker. He actually only had 28 pass attempts too, so a little low on that side as well. Talking about the Broncos, it's a rough situation. The most unfortunate part is going to be the Jerry Jeudy injury. So he injured his ankle. They're already calling it a high ankle sprain. The full injury timeline isn't yet available, but it looks like it's going to sideline him for a majority of the season. I wouldn't anticipate it to be all, but we know how especially these injuries, tend to linger for the whole season. Really disappointing. It's definitely going to put a big dent on his second year in the league. So the overreaction advice here is to not give up on him. Especially this is more of a dynasty owner themed breakdown for the Broncos, but Jeudy, he's got 3 years off his contract, including this year, right at $3.8 million per year. So even if he misses, let's just say he misses let's say he misses the entire season, you still have those next 2 years, and we've seen what he does when he's on the field, especially when he's coming into this, the sophomore season. So I wouldn't trade him for less than he's worth. I don't know if anybody listening to this would either. Most people that play on Dynasty are pretty smart, so I don't think they would trade him for less than he's worth. But I would actually be looking to buy him if I could. Maybe a 2022 second round, something like that. That's at least what I put in my article. I don't think that'll get it done. I definitely wouldn't trade for that, if I was giving him away. But maybe, you find a Jeudy owner who's kind of getting a little antsy after week one, maybe even after week two, you try to give this trade away, if they have to look for the future. So not really a bad offer to throw out there. Another really tough one to talk about is the Packers. So I'm really struggling not trying to overreact with this one because it was just such an awful game. They lost 38-3 to New Orleans. The highest scoring player was Devontae Adams, and you think, well, that's not a surprise. He usually is, at least for the Packers. Well, it's disappointing the fact that he only had 10.6 fantasy points. So, that's pretty sad when that is your highest scoring fantasy output for the team on the day. I don't want to read much into it. These games happen. It's unfortunate it has to be the first game. They have to start the season like that. But, Saints defense is elite. They showed up. They get all the credit. So it's worth noting that a nicely timed Lions matchup should be just what Green Bay needs next week in week 2. Let's talk about the Colts a little bit. So this one was a little bit strange as I watched it. So Paris Campbell was only targeted 3 times, and that's fine. Maybe you were projecting that. I think that Paris is going to have a decently big breakout season this year, so that was a little bit surprising to me. But that might have been what people were thinking was going to happen. What's even more strange, though, is that only 14 of Carson Wentz's 38 pass attempts went to wide receivers. So you got Michael Pittman, you got Paris Campbell, you got Zach Pascal. 3 decent. It's not the best receiving core in the league, but they're decent. They're young at least, and there's no way this trend is going to be able to continue if the Colts plan on winning many games. Obviously they lost their first game. They're not going to be able to continue that if they want to win many games. So Pittman ended up with 5.9 fantasy points. Paris Campbell 3.4. Very disappointing. Look for a rebound in the upcoming weeks, at least hopefully for the Colts' sake, because they can't continue not throwing to the wide receivers. It's just not going to work. And finally, let's talk about the Chiefs. So this might have been the best game of the week. Already talked about the Browns a little bit. So, I don't know what else you can say other than wow. It shouldn't be surprising at this point, but it continues to be when they put up video game numbers. So I'll break it down for you. Patrick Mahomes, he had 43.6 fantasy points, just unbelievable. Tyreek Hill had 37.1 fantasy points. Travis Kelce had 25.6. And this was all in a close game. So that close game kind of helped them continue to need to push the ball on the field. They were actually losing by quite a bit at one point, so that really helped them tally up those big points. And the one disappointing part might be that CEH didn't get the use that many of us would have liked. And, that's kind of just the way it goes. A little bit game script, like I said. Maybe he should have had a little more receptions, a little more targets, but that's kind of the way it works. Mahomes is going to try to work it to his most powerful weapons, and at this point it's Hill and Kelce. I don't think anybody would debate that. That's pretty much it. I wouldn't really tilt about anything, even CEH on this team. And then at the end of my article, so that's all the teams I'm talking about. At the end of my article, I mentioned if you only take one thing from this series, this will be a 2-part series that I'm doing this week and next week, is we've only witnessed 1 week. This is an incredibly small sample size compared to what we're going to get for the rest of the season, taking into fact that we have an extra week, compared to the seasons prior to this. So this is an incredibly small sample size for what we're going to see the rest of the year. I'm a very patient person. I hope all of you are too. I don't give up very easily. I don't think I've ever given up on a player solely because of 1 or 2 weeks. It's never happened. I'll add or drop players, but they were already probably fringe players on my roster anyway. If I have a player that's in my starting lineup in Dynasty Owner, even in my bench lineup, I'm not giving up on them this early. I might trade for them if I get a good offer, but it's not going to be below market value. You really have to get into those, weeks 4, week 5, week 6 before you start to see a theme, at least in my opinion, for a lot of these players. So bear with it. Trust your process. We're all smart here. We've all done our research. Trust your draft process. Trust your strategy. Give yourself at least a third, a fourth of the season before you make critical decisions that you're probably going to regret later on. So that's my spiel. I appreciate everybody reading the article. I appreciate everybody listening to this video. Next week, like I said, I'm going to do part 2. I'm sure it's going to be titled Don't Tilt After 2 weeks. It's going to try to pick up on some of those teams that I didn't talk about this week. And like I said, appreciate everybody reading the article. Go and read that if you haven't, if you're watching the video first. And follow Dynasty Owner on Twitter, and then also subscribe on YouTube to Dynasty Owner. I appreciate everybody listening and taking the time to read. And everybody take care and be safe.